There's a storm across the valley. The clouds are rolling in. The afternoon is heavy on your shoulders. There's a truck out on the 4-lane, a mile or more away. The whining of his wheels just makes it colder.
Okay, welcome to Community Forum. My name is Percilla Almquist-Olson. I'm your host today, August 6th, 2020, and it is with great pleasure and privilege that we have two very distinguished guests to speak to us today about the pressing issues of the 4th Congressional District. I'd like to introduce Dr. Kyla Bennett, who is also an environmental lawyer and has her doctorate in the biology. She represents the public employees for environmental responsibility, but today she's here in her capacity as a concerned voter. And we welcome Dr. Natalia Linos, who is running for the 4th Congressional District, which Joe Kennedy has vacated. And she's running with 8 other competitors. And so today we're giving you an opportunity to reach out to the voters and get your messages across. And I know there are many and that you are so qualified. So please, we'll start with your background.
Sure. So I was born to international students. My parents are both Greek and they were in the US. They're both doctors during their residency. So I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, but they moved back to Greece when I was just 1 month old. And I grew up there. So in many ways, I've lived an immigrant experience. I moved to Massachusetts at 17 to go to college and pretty much decided that this is where I wanted to stay. I loved Massachusetts. I loved the diversity. I studied social anthropology, although I should say at first I was also pre-med and, was taking biochemistry and physics classes. And I decided that I wanted to do something a little bit more social in terms of, interacting with people. So anthropology is what I studied. And soon after graduating from college, I went to work in Beirut in Lebanon. And that set me off on a career working across the world. I worked at the United Nations for a decade. I worked at the New York City Health Department. But now I'm back in Brookline and I direct a Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard. I have my own family. I have 3 little kids, a 7-year-old, Amalia, who goes to Pierce. She's entering 2nd grade. And I also have 3-year-old twins. And I say it with emphasis because I think when parents hear that I have 3-year-old twins, they know that there must be something pretty urgent to get me into a race because most parents are struggling during COVID. I am one of those parents, but it felt urgent to bring my skill set to bear. And my skill set is that I have a doctorate degree in epidemiology. So I'm a public health expert with global experience, and we're in a global pandemic. So it felt urgent and necessary for me to step into this political race.
Well, tell us a little bit about the influences. You've already described some of the influences which have shaped your life and your values, but maybe you could include some of those that prepare you for representing the people of the 4th Congressional District here in Massachusetts.
So, I grew up in a household that truly valued education because my dad's dad was a refugee from Turkey. My mom's dad was a baker in a small village, and they managed to sort of live the American dream, although they lived it in Greece, because they were able to access public education in Greece. Even tertiary education, even medical school was free to them. So they were able to, advance and really, I grew up in a very large family, five kids, a very religious household. I'm the middle child of 5. But it was always education, education, education. All my sisters, we're 4 girls and a little boy, he's in his 30s now. But, the 4 girls are all in academia. All of them are professors, not me. I mean, and so it's been very much a household that valued education. And I think that's common for a lot of immigrant families, this notion that education is your step to be part of, society. But I do think that it's unique, the unique perspective of growing up in a religious home was where some of my values of equity have come forth, where, I stand very strongly around progressive values on health as a human right, environmental justice, and interestingly, not everybody sees those as aligned with religion, but I think my household, because it was religious, is where it began. And obviously my UN experience has crystallized those values quite a bit.
Okay, Kyla, you want to jump in here?
I do, and I just want to a clarification, Percilla, that I am here in my personal capacity, not as in my capacity as a member of PEER. So just to get that out of the way. But Dr. Linos, Joe Kennedy was our rep in the 4th Congressional District, and obviously he will no longer be with us in that capacity, but he was very, very good about being responsive to the people of Easton. Even though we're a very small part of a very strange district, it seems very gerrymandered to me. But I think there's 2,100 households or something in Easton that's in the 4th Congressional District. But he managed to come down to Easton several times a year to meet with us and to sit down and hear us. And I'm wondering whether you would continue that tradition and how you're going to balance the differing interests of the various towns within the 4th Congressional District, because it truly is a wide array of values among towns.
So Kyla, definitely. And unfortunately, I entered this race in response to COVID, and therefore everything I've been doing has been virtual. I haven't been able to come in person, but that isn't a signal of my desire not to be available. So every day, every weekday, Monday through Friday at noon, I have a Zoom. I'm on Zoom every day, and something called Ask Me Anything. So anybody can jump in. And I think that's trying to signal to people that I am here because as a representative, I need to listen just as much as, have my ideas and my opinions, but that will come from listening. And I recognize that everybody won't come to the same, won't have the same beliefs. And part of representing people is truly, truly engaging and listening. I do think under COVID, there are a lot of shared anxieties. I've been talking to parents across Brookline, Newton, Fall River, Rehoboth, and everybody's just like, what is happening in the fall? So because COVID is so over encompassing our lives and it has impacted us so greatly, I do think, strangely enough, it has created some unifying factors. I think every single parent wants us to get COVID right. But in the future, once we get through this, I know that every town, every community will have different needs, needs in terms of what types of jobs, what infrastructure, public transportation access. There are so many differences. And I do truly commit to be representing everyone. And I will be coming down. I will be making sure to, make myself available, whether it's through social media and phone and just these, Zoom calls, but also just my personality is one where, I've worked at the United Nations with people from very different backgrounds with very different beliefs. And I do think that makes me a very good listener. I listen well, I care deeply about people. So the other advantage is that I'm not a politician. So I don't come from, say, the Brookline community with deep roots and political relationships. So, I'm basically new to everyone, and therefore everybody gets to listen to me and engage with me. So that I think works better for some of the communities that have been less, who feel that they've been left out in the political process, because I'm not political in that sense. I don't have deep political connections to some people. It's basically everybody's new to me.
Well, I'm glad that you pointed that out, because this interview is going to be digitally transmitted to all the cable stations in the cities and towns in your district. So keep that in mind when you respond to some of our questions.
Great.
Tell us why you're running.
So I'm running because of the COVID tragedy. Percilla, it has been playing out in it's so obvious that the federal government has failed us. There's been a desire to push the responsibility to states and to governors and to local authorities when the federal government should be stepping up, because we are facing the biggest crisis of our generation. We have right now over 155,000 Americans who have lost their lives, and there simply isn't a plan. As an epidemiologist and as someone who has studied disease and how, infectious diseases especially play out and reinforce inequities, I knew early on that we would have a problem in terms of who is being hurt. and which communities and the, disadvantages that working class families face. And so, in March and April, I started working with the Poor People's Campaign to, call attention to some of these inequities, writing pieces in the Washington Post and in Foreign Affairs. But then it became obvious that, if we really want scientists to be part of the solution, we can't hope that politicians will listen to them. We need to step in and run for office and be elected. And right now, Congress has 14 scientists. That's it. And there's only one person with a doctorate degree in public health. And that, for me, is troublesome because COVID-19 recovery is not about weeks. It's not even about months. It's going to take years to really get us back to where we need to be. And, the next Congress will be deciding on the vaccine, how it's rolled out, how it's developed. They're going to be deciding about how schools are supported or not supported. And I do think that my expertise as a public health, leader, but also my perspective as a mom of young kids, as an immigrant, brings in nuance that is really important as we try and create a path that not only, reopens our economy and our country safely, but also we can hope that this recovery will lead us to a better future because, normal didn't work for so many Americans. So we need to build back in a way that is more equitable.
So what do you think about the schools reopening in a few weeks here in Massachusetts?
So, Kyla, I believe that as long as we can keep infection, rates low, school reopening is possible safely. I hear from a lot of teachers that are deeply worried about the classrooms and ventilation. So I do think we need to be creative. In Brookline, for example, my daughter's school, Pierce, is right next door to the Brookline Public Library, which is much bigger. And I think that we should be exploring new venues. Could the public library be classroom space instead of having smaller spaces? Or if there are restaurants or office buildings that are empty, could other local, we do need to think creatively about space because we need more space. But fundamentally, I think that because this is the long haul, we're not going to be over. If it was like a 2 or 3 month challenge, I would say, stay closed. But we're talking about a year, maybe 2 years. And I do believe that schools serve a very important purpose for kids. And I worry that kids, and not only their education, it's their socialization, it's their mental health, but also, school feeding programs and where kids sometimes get health, advice. And so part of me feels that we have to be aiming for in-person instruction because too many families, especially working families, simply can't do the remote. And then you have wealthy families who will hire private tutors or private nannies, but that leaves so many kids behind. So my perspective is the federal government and also local authorities need to say schools are a top priority. That means we need to close our indoor dining. I really think we need to take a step back in Massachusetts. Like restaurants should not be open. We need to reconsider whether gyms or museums need to be open because if we say schools need to be safe in September, everything else has to take precedence. And then we can hopefully open safely. Of course, we should only open if it's safe, but I do think it's possible for us. And, as a working mom, I do worry that the impact is not only going to be felt by kids if we don't open, but also by working parents, and disproportionately so for moms who may end up pulling out of the workforce or going part-time. And so I think we have to take into account that there is no good solution, but that in-person instruction is good for kids, is good for parents, and as long as it can be safe for teachers and staff, it is what we should be striving for, and as a state and as a country prioritizing. And so if I make it to Congress, I will be also pushing for federal money to go to schools because schools have been underfunded. So they can't really make the changes that they need to be safe. So the federal government should be giving money, resources, and guidance on this.
Great. That actually is a good segue to a question that I had about college debt. And, college debt is surpassing $1.7 trillion. And that is also an issue of equity. I'm wondering what your feelings are about the rising costs of college and the debt that the younger generation is saddled with and how the federal government can help handle that and deal with that.
I'm deeply, deeply concerned about the rising debt and about the rising cost of colleges. I mean, and that's why I talked about my parents and the fact that they were able to live the American dream because they didn't need to pay for college, because that what made it possible for someone who is the son of a refugee and the daughter of a baker to go to medical school and and, you know, have the career they needed. I think we need to, especially because of COVID, address college debt of graduates that are graduating, that just graduated and next year graduating. I mean, these kids are going to have such a hard time entering an economy that already has so many people who are unemployed, and they're not going to get the same unemployment benefits because they never were employed. So I think we need to have some significant debt relief immediately. In the long term, we need to consider seriously, you know, free colleges, whether it's public colleges or, you know, community colleges. I've been talking to a lot of the education experts who say that, you know, we need to make community college free for sure, and most likely 4-year public colleges free. They said, you know, we could do some means testing, and as a scientist, you know, I would be running the numbers, making sure that it is, you know, any benefit is disproportionately benefiting working class and middle class families and not, you know, the wealthiest families. But as long as we can secure it. But your point about debt, that's what a lot of the research shows, is the debt is very inequitable in terms of racial lines and economic lines. So we have to not only look forward to free college, but also address the debt. And I do think that the federal government will need to step in and provide some relief immediately.
Well, I attended the University of Stockholm many, many years ago, and I didn't pay for that. And Sweden is really a wonderful role model for taking care of your citizens from cradle to grave without diminishing the entrepreneurial spirit and accomplishments. They're a very capitalistic society. They have created Spotify and Minecraft and I think the pacemaker, and of course a lot of other things that I didn't even know about. But do you think that the Swedish model is appropriate for the States? And if so, how would you go about
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, the Nordic models in a lot of ways, you know, we need to be learning from other countries. And, you know, there are not too many candidates in this race who have as much international experience as me. You know, having worked at the United Nations, I have seen good examples, not only on the education front, but also on the healthcare front, on the, you know, job creation front, on the poverty alleviation front. And I do think that we need to start learning from good examples. Where I think the most important example is the early childhood. I mean, part. I think we have failed on the early childhood education, providing, you know, free or very affordable early childhood, you know, whether it's the model of like, you know, daycare from, you know, 1 year on or 3 year plus, you know, I think for our country, we should be aiming for at least universal pre-K at 3 that is free. But, you know, you've seen countries, yeah, like Sweden and Norway that provide, you know, for $200 a week, you can get childcare from, you know, 1 year and above. And it starts at 1 year because they also have very generous maternal leave or parental leave policies. So, and I think the argument there is that investing in education, investing in your children, and investing in parents so that they can get back to the workplace is economically sound. That builds for a society that can, you know, invent Spotify and all of that. That it is, you know, it is within that same notion of we want our societies to innovate and to be leaders in terms of the economy. So I do think there's a lot to be learned from other countries on how they think about all of their social benefits and social services and what trade-offs are prioritized. You know, in this race, I've been talking to people and they say budgeting, and you know, something I have heard and I love to repeat is that budgeting should be a moral exercise. You know, we should talk about what we value. We value health, we value education, we value well-being, and let's make sure our budgets reflect that. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So that's where I think we can do better.
We've talked a lot about racial inequality, and you may or may not know that DJ Henry lived in Easton before he was murdered in New York, and his family is still here. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how to address that issue of police brutality and racial inequities in Congress.
Yeah, it is absolutely necessary, and I'm glad to see sort of the you know, DJ Henry's and the case and other cases being reopened and reevaluated and rethought of. You know, it's really important. Justice is really important. I have worked on racial equity and police violence for a long time. As you know, as a social epidemiologist, as someone who studies health as something that is shaped in our communities and our neighborhoods, we look at racial inequities as the telling message where we know that systemic racism is alive and real, because we see infant mortality rates, maternal mortality rates, HIV, cancer, everything basically showing these stark disparities between Black Americans and white Americans. So it's important to say that systemic racism is alive and well in all our institutions, not just the police. But the police and our criminal legal system is broken. Mass incarceration is, it's embarrassing that the US has less than 5% of the world's population, but 20% of incarcerated people. And we have hurt so many communities, especially communities of color, though, that are disproportionately, in our prisons and jails, and many in our jails because they can't pay bail. But to the point about police violence, it is so important to call for police reform. It is also important for the federal government to start to have a database. A lot of the researchers, because I work even in the center that I lead now at Harvard on Health and Human Rights, we do work on police violence, and we don't have data. We rely on, media reports, because there is no national registry of police-involved killings. Like, that should be available, and that's how you can hold different police departments accountable if they show that, an aberration. So I do think we need to have the conversation around police reform. We need to have a conversation around budgets and, why we're criminalizing poverty and why we're criminalizing mental illness, why we're criminalizing homelessness, how to make policing safer, meaning, what tools do we have? What do we need to stop in terms of chokeholds and weapons that people use, getting rid of tear gas? There's a lot that we can do about policing becoming safer, but I think the first step is really to acknowledge that systemic racism is real. And, racism kills directly through police violence, but it also kills indirectly through everything else that we've seen in terms of our health outcomes. And if we can get to a point where we acknowledge that, then I think we're better able to craft a response that is systemic. So I actually am for reparations. I think that this country has to own up to the legacy, 400 years of slavery, Jim Crow, and what the federal government did in terms of redlining and other policies that have led to such wealth inequities and other inequities. So anyways, I went from policing to much bigger, but I think it is a much bigger conversation, because I do think policing reflects the fact that we have a deep history to come to terms with.
And in that conversation is also gun reform measures. Oh. And so can you comment on that a bit?
Yeah, completely. First of all is recognizing that the NRA has too much power in our political system, and that needs to end. But we need to get rid of assault weapons. We need to stop militarizing our police. Allowing for basically tanks to be on our streets is inappropriate and it's dangerous. So we need to make sure that is not there. And gun violence, as a public health expert, I see it within the realm of public health. You can do something to prevent gun violence, and you can do a lot by ensuring that you have better background checks in terms of who can access guns. I believe that if someone's having a mental health crisis, you remove guns from them. I think there are ways to think about putting in place measures. As a mom, I do worry, about school shootings, or, you hear about movie theater shootings, but some of those are sensationalized. But the reality is our country, it is off the charts compared to other countries. And there's where I think the UN kind of comparative lens is important. We can learn a lot from other places where they have safety and security and not as much gun violence as, by far a lot less. So I believe in making some serious changes to our gun laws.
Kyla, you want to talk about the climate change and all the environmental issues that you're so expert in?
Yes, I would love to. Dr. Linos, I'm a scientist as well, but I'm an ecologist and an environmentalist, and I work for an environmental whistleblower group. But I think personally that climate change is so overarching and such a huge problem for the world, and Massachusetts, that everything else is kind of rearranging the deck furniture on the Titanic. If we don't address climate change, nothing else really matters. And passing the Green New Deal or rejoining the Paris Accord is not going to be enough. How do you see getting to net zero by 2035? And is the Generation 4 nuclear something that you would consider, given that it's much safer and has a far less waste than the old style nuclear plants?
All right, many questions there, Kyla.
Sorry.
Let me start with, first of all, acknowledging that I agree with you that our climate emergency is truly an existential threat. And I led the work of the UN Development Program at the intersection of climate, environment, and health. And there I met with a lot of, leaders, ministers from small island developing states, young activists from the Maldives and other places that, this isn't about 15 or 20 years, it's about today and tomorrow. Their existential threat is here and now. And I entered the environmental advocacy space through a social justice lens. So for me, it has always been an environmental justice lens, and recognizing that the countries and the people who are least responsible for this climate crisis are the ones who are paying the price. And so I really want many of the social justice, racial justice activists to get on board, like I have, onto the environmental movement, because I think it is, as you said, all like the big picture, the big crisis that we face. I think that as an epidemiologist and as someone who has entered from that side, there is something to be said about the health message being very powerful. And I have seen that happen on the global scale. So the air pollution challenge that countries have faced, whether we're talking about Delhi or other cities, has been very powerful to convince governments to take action on fossil fuels, because air pollution is real. They can see it, they can smell it, they can fear it. Climate change somehow has become kind of, many people didn't, they were kind of postponing the issue, but air pollution and the health narrative, I feel, has been very powerful. And so that's one way, I think, to encourage people who maybe in the past weren't thinking about it. And at a time of COVID, I think it's especially important to ensure that any recovery money for COVID is aligned with the Green New Deal. I actually see it as a tremendous opportunity because the federal government is going to have to get people back to work. And in the past, that could have been, building roads and big kind of infrastructure projects, but those infrastructure projects can be the South Coast Rail. It can be, public transportation, which is a triple win, a win for health, a win for the environment, and a win for the economy, because then people can get to work and jobs. And, offshore wind is, obviously hugely appealing for Massachusetts because of the potential that it offers. But it's, again, a triple win. It's a win for the environment, a win for jobs, and a win for health. So my priority, for Massachusetts, and would be, of course, focusing on the transportation challenge, since 40% of our emissions are due to transportation. So clearly, deep investments in public transport. And, as an aside, I should note that I'm privileged enough to live in Brookline, where I can be in a car-free household. That is not the case for many people across our district. And it should be the fact that I can ride on a bus to get to work, or, walk or ride a bicycle. That's something that I think many families would want, and we just haven't made it possible. And, again, going back to the UN experience, I have seen cities transform in a small amount of time. Cities in Colombia, cities across the world have really expanded public transportation in ways that if they can do it, we can do it. So that would be one, a real transformation of our public transportation system. The second would be, of course, the energy piece. And I think, solar as well as offshore wind. But I do think that businesses need incentives, whether those are tax breaks or just, a better time horizon, not having to worry that these incentives will go away in 5 years. You need like the 15-year incentives. And I do think that we do need to talk about some behavioral changes, whether it's, through what we eat and our agriculture system, meat and all of that. Nuclear. All right, so today I was in Fall River for the 75th anniversary of the Hiroshima bomb. And I know that nuclear weapons are a tremendous fear and an existential threat. But that doesn't equate to nuclear energy. I mean, I do remember, because I was living in Greece during Chernobyl, my parents panicking and putting iodine all over us. And, you know, I was a young kid. So I know that there is fear around nuclear accidents, but I think we have come a long way. And I do think that the science is telling us that it's at least important to start opening that up again. We need to be careful about which communities, you know, just as we know in terms of the environmental justice piece that coal plants are located in, you know, poorer communities. Like, we need to be thoughtful and intentional on making sure that we're not putting some populations at risk, because accidents can happen. But I do think that the conversation should be back on the table, and I would support that as a scientist, as someone who has seen the evidence and considered that, yeah, the waste situation is one of them. And, you know, I understand that the pricing yet is not favorable, but, you know, we have to invest in research and innovation in order to get there.
You raised the South Coast Rail, which is one of those issues that two of your districts probably disagree on. So the town of Easton, the leadership in the town of Easton, traditionally, I don't know what the new select board thinks right now, but in the past they have been opposed to the South Coast Rail because of the fact that it bisects the Hockomock Swamp, which is an area of critical environmental concern. It comes very close to our wells. The road crossings are massively dangerous in our town, would be, and Fall River, of course, wants it. But you know, in that particular case, they're talking about building a $4 billion train bisecting a 17,000 acre wetland that's an area of critical environmental concern, when they've already got a line going in between Fall River, New Bedford through Middleborough to Boston. And this is for 1,500 riders. And I always wonder whether, especially now after this pandemic has taught us that you can work from home, and wouldn't it be more environmentally responsible and easier for people to live where you work and take some of that $4 billion instead of building a train and putting it into the cities of Fall River and New Bedford so that people could live and work there without having to do a 2-hour commute each way?
I mean, Kyla, I think, you know, you raise an important point. I do think that who gets to work from home is not equitably distributed, you know, and so the types of jobs that are available to a lot of the residents in Fall River currently are not the types of jobs where they can work from home. So we do, but your point about investing that money to create those jobs either in Fall River and therefore not have to commute if they're in-person jobs, or to encourage more remote, I do think we will have a transformation in our work environment. And on the piece of, you know, the South Coast Rail, it's really good to hear your perspective, because that doesn't come up as much. You know, everybody in Fall River is really talking about transportation, but the biodiversity loss and the biodiversity impact is, you know, is truly important. So I'm happy, you know, to be talking, and I'm happy to actually offline have another conversation with you about this, because I would love to learn a little bit more about the concerns. I mean, there will be trade-offs in any big infrastructure project. I personally am for rapid bus transit and creating, you know, single lanes. It's cheaper. We can do it immediately. You know, I recognize that buses aren't as, you know, I don't know, as the preferred mode, although I love buses, you know, I love being on them. I love, you know, but I understand that's my personal preference. But I do think that, you know, there is something that can be done, and it can be done quickly, and it can be free, you know, because it's not a big investment cost to build. But, you know, the bottom line, though, is that Fall River and towns around there feel that they've been left out of the economic development agenda. And part of it is this disconnect to transportation. And so if we do not do the South Coast, then we do need to say this money will be invested there. And we will have to, you know, there has to be a, you know, as you're an environmentalist, is the just transition part needs to be central. Yeah.
Well, we in Easton supported the bus alternative because it was cheaper, faster, and the routes could be changed according to the population's needs. And you cannot do that with the railroad.
Yeah.
No. Kyla, do you have some more questions?
I do have one other environmentally oriented question, which is PFAS, per and fluoroalkyl substances. And, you know, Easton, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Easton's wells are contaminated. All but one of our wells are contaminated. We don't know where it's coming from. And my suspicion is that probably at least half the towns, if not more, in Massachusetts have PFAS contaminated wells. Some of it's from Department of Defense, some of it's from firefighting foam. The rest of it, we don't know where it's coming from. This administration's EPA has been kicking the can down the road, and I'm wondering what might you be able to do in Congress to help towns like Easton and the other towns in Massachusetts that do have contaminated wells. It's going to cost us something like $14 million for a filtration plant, and we simply do not have the money. Yeah. What can be done on that front?
That's a great question. And, you know, being honest with you, it's not one that I have thought about in great detail, but it has come up. You know, water quality, obviously, from, you know, my husband's family is from Detroit, but from, you know, thinking about Flint, but also thinking about, you know, I was talking to some students who are in, you know, in different towns, and they say water quality is top of mind. And so it is both, you know, the wells, the filtration, but also what we can do. I do think, again, as a public health expert, I could bring to bear that, you know, need to, first of all, test the quality of our waters and ensure that they are safe. I think that message of safe water, drinking water, and safe, you know, for our communities is critical. And, you know, 14 million is a lot of money for Easton, but it's not a lot of money for the federal government. So there are ways to provide that financial support. And I am completely appalled by the rollbacks of this administration in terms of a lot of air quality and environmental standards. And those have to be put back in place immediately because, you know, our health depends on it and our planet depends on it. So I am a strong, strong supporter of environmental quality controls and using data to guide us as to where we invest. And so again, it's not something that has been top of mind in my campaign because you know, climate change, you know, my environmental platform has been so focused on climate change, but water is so central from a public health perspective. So I'd be a strong supporter of financial federal support and guidelines and clear, you know, communities need to know whether their water is okay to drink, what are the risks. And, you know, I know a lot of environmental public health folks, you know, there's the toxic sort of waste, toxic pollution, and other, you know, other exposures that we have, not only through our water, but also as consumers, is really key for our well-being.
Thank you.
Okay. Kyla was instrumental in helping many of the Easton residents to procure a water pump to cleanse the water so that we could avoid the PFASs. But not everyone has the finances to be able to support that route. So, so anyway, tell me, we have a very crowded field. I believe there are 9 candidates. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so how do you, to me, that's kind of a mind-boggling problem, because here you are with all of this knowledge, all of this information, all of this expertise and background, and the global experience that you've had working for the United Nations. Here you are at Harvard and in charge of a crucial program that would benefit all of Massachusetts citizens. So tell me, how are you coping and what are you doing to distinguish yourself? You are distinguishable, but what are you doing to distinguish yourself from the other 8 candidates in this race?
So Percilla, what I say is under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have entered this race. You know, if this wasn't a global pandemic, I would be home with my 3-year-olds and my 7-year-old, just trying to survive, you know, like every other parent is surviving. But it really did feel urgent for me to step in. And I stepped in with just 1 week before the nomination papers were due. And it was, you know, a crazy idea, but one that felt necessary and it felt urgent. And I was angry. It was when President Trump said he was going to defund the World Health Organization. And when we had already lost, I think we had already lost 60,000 Americans, and things were playing out already really, really in such a depressing way. And I said, I can't just sit on the sidelines as, in an academic center and write and call attention to this. There were the, Fire Fauci kind of tweets going on. And I said to myself, I need to step into this. And I think the public and District 4 sees that was a legitimate desire for me to serve. It's not that I have been sitting and planning how am I going to become Congresswoman. I have been serving my entire career. I've been serving at the UN, I've been serving at the New York City Health Department, and I'm now leading a center on health and human rights. Importantly, human rights, is there as part of my commitment. And it felt urgent and it felt necessary. And so that message has been resonating. The challenge, of course, by entering late is that I have to rely on word of mouth. So within a week, within 5 days, we got 1,000 signatures because people are excited to have someone with my background at a time of a global pandemic. The challenge though now is that, some people are not following as closely this race, and I probably won't have, well, not probably, I know I won't have $1 million to spend on television ads. So I still have to rely on word of mouth. The energy though of my campaign, I've managed to recruit over 200 volunteers, a lot of young students, from BU and Brandeis and BC, across Massachusetts, but also a lot of, moms and grandparents who think that my commitment to climate action is important and that I have experience not only as an epidemiologist, but on the climate front, because that's so central to them, and know that in New York City, I worked on racial justice. So I have all of these people, making calls, text banking, standing out on corners, holding signs. So I'm distinguishing myself by running a race that is truly grassroots. It's not grassroots in terms of only, the money where it's coming in, but truly it feels like a movement where people are out on the streets and calling their friends and their friends' friends and letting people know. Yeah, like Kyla. I mean, and it's so wonderful to really feel like it's a movement. So I think what distinguishes me is that it's not me. It's not that they're voting for Natalia. I mean, I have the qualifications, but they're voting for bringing science to Congress at a time of a pandemic. And I think that's it. It's just this message of we need more scientists. And that happens to be Natalia right now, so they're getting behind me, but it could be anyone else. And I've allowed, and so it's exciting to have all these scientists, all these healthcare workers get behind me. I don't have the traditional, thousands of endorsements from mayors and political figures because I'm not a known political entity. But there's this belief that we don't need another politician right now. What we need is a different type of leadership. And so it's, I'm distinguishing myself in debates and through calls, and, we may put up a short 1 week television ad if we can afford it, but, there is a lot of momentum in my campaign. So that's been exciting.
Well, my last question was, why do you believe you're the best candidate to represent the 4th Congressional District? But I think you have adequately and fully explained that and answered that question. So Kyla, do you have any other questions?
I had one last question. I read an interview that you did, I think it was in one of the Boston papers, and you talked about wind power and how it had to be safe for the right whale. And I was thrilled that that's one of my campaigns is the right whale. I've been trying to save them since 1999. There's only 85 breeding females left. Yep. And one of the big issues for Fall River is the lobster fishery. And these whales are getting entangled in the lines, and ropeless gear is a real thing, but the lobstermen say they can't afford it, it's not gonna work. Would you push for something like that? I mean, to me, that's the only win-win solution for saving the right whale and saving the lobster fishery. Is that something that you would be willing to press when you get into, notice I said when you get into Congress? Yes,
Kyla, I would. I am deeply committed to biodiversity, and I think it's so important, both, our animals and our whales and our endangered species. I have a deep commitment, but I from the UN perspective, I have seen it through the livelihoods lens. Biodiversity is so critical to many people's livelihoods, whether they're in fishing or in ecotourism. So we do need to create win-wins, when livelihoods are at stake. And if it's costly, we subsidize that technology. That's why we have research and innovation, in order to be able to find solutions that work for people's jobs and ensure their livelihoods and protect our environment. And I don't think there is anything too expensive that protects both if you adequately account for the externalities, you know. And again, this is a data kind of exercise, but we need to think about what are the externalities of losing these 85 whales. You know, what is that cost to our society and to our country and to our world? And if we adequately price that, you know, loss of biodiversity, then we can explain why we're investing in this technology and providing it at a subsidized rate to the lobster, you know, I was going to say farmers, but that's not the fishery. You know, so I think it's important, and that is where I think we've gotten a lot of things wrong. We don't adequately account for the externalities of pollution. We don't adequately account for the externalities of biodiversity loss. And right now in this COVID crisis, we're not adequately accounting for the externalities on gender equality and education for parents who have to stay home. So we need to be using data in a holistic way and recognizing that there are always trade-offs, and we can't forget some of the, you know, negative things that are resulting from our policies. So yes, and Kyla, my promise is that I will be an ear to the environmental, you know, I will have an open ear, but I will always have a justice lens in mind. So if somebody's livelihood is going to get lost, I will find ways to compensate for that. I think we can have win-wins. I honestly do. And I have seen that happen at the UN, and I have seen that happen in much poorer countries. So our country can do better.
It's nice to hear that hope, because these days hope is something that is not very prevalent.
That's true. That's true. And that's, maybe I should end with that, saying that, you know, a lot of people are saying to me, like, how do you keep optimistic? And my hope, and the reason I'm running, is that we are facing truly a tragedy. You know, 155,000 dead already. We're going to hit 200,000 in the fall. We have to use this opportunity to actually build back better. Otherwise, we've wasted those 200,000 lives. We need to say that our system didn't work for them. We need to fight for Medicare for all. We need to align recovery to the Green New Deal so that our future is actually one that protects us from a future pandemic, that protects our families. And, you know, otherwise, I feel like we have wasted this opportunity. So we're in a tragic moment that can be used to motivate real change.
Well, thank you so much. Before we close, I would like you to give the audience some contact information. So those people who would like to volunteer, who would like to learn more about who you are, although you've given us a wonderful, wonderful resume today, and we appreciate the time you've spent to talk to our listeners. So please, and we will post it at the end of this program for everyone to see.
Thank you so much, Percilla. So my website is simple. It's Natalia, my name, Natalia, for Congress.com. On there, people can volunteer. There's a tab to volunteer. And there's a tab to ask for lawn signs. We'd love for you to put one up in your gardens. You can sign up for a phone bank, or, you know, even donate if you want to support the campaign financially. My email is just natalia@nataliaforcongress.com. And every day at noon, I am on Zoom, and I am open to answer questions. And I love that one-on-one. You know, it's 2 or 3 people who show up, and we have great conversations. And they range from, you know, what I'm thinking about the Postal Service, to what I want to do in terms of voting age, to the environment, to criminal justice. And it's been great. And so I encourage any of the listeners to just get online at noon. It's very casual. You know, I'm there often with my kids running around, and I'm there to listen and to just engage. And that is my way of trying to connect and make sure that I have heard from every single person that I'll be representing.
For those of us who are technologically challenged, how do we access the noon Zoom meeting with you?
So if you go to my website, on the top of the website, you click on it, and the link will be there. But if you have any trouble, you can just, on the website, there's a sort of email that goes directly to our inbox. You can just type a question and say, I'd like to join, please send me the Zoom link. So we're responsive. And, you know, if for some reason it doesn't work, I'm also been engaging with people on the phone, you know, if they can, you know, I want to be available to everyone. But I've connected, you know, with folks in across the district through this, and it's been working. But if you have any trouble, we'll definitely sort it out for you.
And Percilla,
Well, thank you.
I can help you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bennett. And thank you, Dr. Linos. It's been wonderful, wonderful talking with you today and sharing your wonderful vision for the 4th Congressional District. We wish you the best of luck, and we hope to see you again. And for all those people who are watching today in Easton, but in all the cities and towns of your district, we hope you've enjoyed this program, and as much as we have enjoyed making it. So thank you again, Dr. Linos.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you both.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.